Today's reading comes from Genesis chapter 32. The same night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Our faith is built in part on old stories, often stories so old that have been told so often that we think we know them well. And sometimes these old stories can still surprise us with meanings we never realized were there. A few weeks ago, we spent our Sunday night Bible study discussing that story everyone knows about, Jacob wrestling with the angel. Or so I thought. That's how I've always thought of this story. That's how it's portrayed in art and how it's talked about in conversation, at least in my circles. There's Jacob, the angel, or God, depending on which theologian's interpretation you've been given your whole life, and the whole thing about the hip. We decided to read the story in the wider context of the rest of the chapter. For those of you who don't know or need a refresher, Jacob had a twin brother named Esau, and these were the sons of Isaac, the grandsons of Abraham. When their mother Rebekah was pregnant, she noticed that they seemed to be struggling together in her womb. She asked God what was going on, and God said, "2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, the older shall serve the younger." When the children were born, Esau came first, with Jacob holding his heel. This meant that by seconds or minutes, Esau was the oldest and therefore entitled to all the rights and responsibilities of that position in the family. The word Jacob means striver or usurper, and it turns out that his name, like so many biblical names, was no accident. Jacob knew he'd missed the opportunity to be the oldest by the tiniest margin, and he always saw himself in competition with his twin. Jacob wanted what Esau had. One hungry day, for instance, Esau bargained away his birthright as oldest son to Jacob for some stew. Later on, with the help of his mother, Jacob fooled his father Isaac into blessing him with what was supposed to be Esau's blessing as the oldest son. Apparently, there was only one blessing, and it couldn't be amended. After that incident, Esau was understandably upset, and Jacob fled for his life. The story covers several chapters in Genesis, but I've given you the extremely short version of the fraught backstory of these 2 brothers. We can safely say that at this moment, when we come to this story, they were not on good terms. What we don't get from the way this tiny piece of the story is given to us on a Sunday is that Jacob is sending his family, animals, and servants across the Jabbok River in the middle of the night because he knows that Esau, who he hasn't seen since Jacob stole his blessing, is coming for him. Jacob is afraid, and with good reason. He has been a bit of a jerk, to put it mildly, and he knows what he deserves. I should mention that Jacob really knows exactly what he deserves. This is a pattern with him. His actions have also resulted in a fraught relationship with his father-in-law, Laban, with whom he had been seeking shelter while fleeing from Esau. Jacob seems to be the kind of guy who really makes his own trouble. Jacob has already sent some animals to Esau as a peace offering, and yet he sees Esau coming to meet him the next day with 400 men. Jacob, understandably, thinks he's about to be killed. But instead, Esau runs to him, embraces him, and kisses him. He asks about Jacob's family. He refuses Jacob's peace offering, saying he has more than enough. He offers to journey alongside him. Jacob, for his part, bows to Esau, calls his brother my lord, and refers to himself as your servant. These two brothers, who have competed their whole lives, are reconciled to one another by putting aside their own injuries and pride. Instead of worrying about what each one owes the other, they decide their relationship is more important than the grudges that have kept them apart. So, how do we get here? We don't have any idea what kind of transformation Esau has gone through during this time, only that his brother ran away because he was so afraid of the consequences of what he'd done. Genesis mostly gives us Jacob's side of the story, punctuated with a couple of asides telling us about major life events for Esau, but nothing super transformative. But we do get the story of Jacob's transformation. This second twin, whose name proclaimed to everyone that he would always be struggling for his place, had lived his life from a perspective of scarcity, always feeling that he had to push others out of the way to get his. In this moment, he was given permission to finally stop struggling against this person he had wronged and return to relationship with the one who knew him best. He had to give himself permission to stop struggling. When he finally stopped, he received a blessing from God, not out of trickery, but as part of his own transformation. So, who was the unnamed one Jacob was wrestling with beside the river? Some scholars believe it was God or an angel. Some scholars believe that Jacob was actually struggling with himself in preparation for his meeting with Esau. Whoever it was, Jacob came away from that struggle changed, with a new name and with a limp. We don't know how Esau passed that night or how he was changed before he and his brother reconciled. But whatever change happened, it was necessary. And both brothers ultimately came away with an abundance of blessings. Humans have always worried about not having enough. And there's a reason why so many stories of faith remind us of the richness that is possible when we open ourselves to deeper relationship, when we trust, when we live out of the assumption that, yes, there is enough for everyone. If I can stop worrying about whether I'm going to get ahead, I can turn my attention to showing love to the people around me. If I can stop worrying about whether I'm going to get mine, there are so many opportunities for me to allow my life to make a greater and more positive impact on the world around me. Rather than considering the world through a scarcity mindset, we are called to look at the abundance around us and share it. Doing that is scary, and it requires us to set aside the part of ourselves that thinks we must always have more. We know there's enough in this world of everything, but some of us hoard resources because we're worried, like Jacob, that there won't be enough. But there is enough. It's a problem of distribution. And if we know that, we can be part of a world that becomes more beautiful, more loving, and more just. There are enough blessings to go around. There is enough grace to go around. And that truth is transformative. Amen.